good evening, all. Today we have with us Shri Anu Comptroller and Auditor General. And as you know that DSPPC is having its lecture series Vyakhan 2020. So we are going to have this lecture on accountability and governance. And I know Shri Anupam Kulshrestha, a good student because he was our student when he was doing LLB. And the interesting thing was that LLB and he was a student in the Faculty of Law. And at the same time, he was the performing dual duty of being a student and being a teacher at two different faculties of the same university. I'll now request Dr. Subhash Pandey to formally welcome him.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Avjay. And welcome, Kulshrestha sir. Good evening, friends. So today we have chosen this session on governance and accountability to launch this special series where we are inviting senior bureaucrats. And here we have a senior bureaucrat who also combines rare of being an academician. He has an extensive experience in teaching, both in the IAS Academy, Missouri, then in the INDS Academy at Shimla, then the Specialized Academy of Audit and Accounts on IT systems in ICSI in Noida, and thereafter also in the National Institute of Financial Management, Faridabad. He has a postgraduate in physics with an LLB and MBA to top it. So it's a wide-ranging interest, and he distinguished himself as a Deputy Comptroller Auditor General, handling various assignments in audit, and also abroad to foreign governments in the audit advising on audit matters, and even within the department in various disciplines of HRD, revenue audit, IT audit, and many pioneering initiatives in the audit institutions have been taken under his leadership. So today's topic is very apt. The for all democracies pride themselves on the basis of being accountable to the sovereign, the people, and the accountability institutions are built based on transparency and systems where there are performance declarations and performance assessment. So performance audit is one of the tools of accountability apart from other institutions. So I'm sure we look forward to Mr. Kulshrestha dwelling on this issue in the broader context, and also coming up with more practical aspects, as is his wont in his lectures, to enlighten us. Over to Mr. Kulshrestha. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Pandey. I think at the outset, I must express my thank to Mr. Subhash Pandey and to Professor Ahuja for giving me this opportunity to share my views on this particular, a very interesting topic on governance and accountability. I saw that the topic had been put down as accountability and governance, and I thought we have to have governance first, then only the issue of accountability comes. So what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about governance and various aspects of governance, and then come down to accountability and try to relate the two, and maybe then some time for discussion. I will request if all the participants can mute their speaker, because then the voice will be clear, please. So when we talk of governance, I think at the beginning, I make some distinction between governance and government, because government is that infrastructure which exists to deliver the governance. We can say that government is all about the hardware and governance is all about the software as such. There have been various theories of governance, and there has been a thinking that government should work as a controller, and there have been another thinking that government must function as a facilitator. Somehow, if you recall that when this government came over, then Mr. Modi came and gave an announcement that it should be a minimum government and maximum governance. And he said, yes, we should be functioning more as a facilitator and not really as a controller. And in my view, government should be more about facilitating rather than controlling. And once it is about facilitating, then I think the accountability issues becomes, in any case, much easier as such. So how do we define governance? I think, to put simply, it is the way to do things. How do we achieve our objectives? We set up some rules, regulations, some law, some policy, some procedure, and the ultimate aim is that certain pre-decided objectives must be achieved. World Bank has added a word power to the definition of governance. And World Bank says that governance is, the kind of power which is given to the government to meet with the development objectives. And using the word power is important enough, because if power is not there, then the rules, regulations, law, policy, etc. really become totally ineffective. And power, in our case, comes from the constitution of the country, which defines who can do what, and maybe we'll talk about that a bit later. Now, when we are talking of these objectives, we're talking about that the government is ultimately there to meet with certain objectives. What are these objectives? Where these objectives come from? Some are unwritten objectives coming from time immemorial, like the law and order. Any government may come, even from the time of the kings, the governments are only worried about the law and order. So law and order is a necessity, even though it may not be written down as such somewhere. Then each government comes with some sort of a policy pronouncements. And these policy pronouncements could be either from a top-down approach or from a bottom-up approach. When I say top-down approach, I mean a particular political party, before they contest the election, in their manifesto, they put down certain things. And when they win the election, whatever they had put down in their manifesto becomes a policy automatically. Whether that is economically viable or not is not the question, because they have won the election on that mandate, to give an example, when a certain CM says that if he wins, he will give free electricity, or, then certainly whether giving free electricity is economically viable or not is not the issue. It just becomes a policy. That becomes a top-down approach. Or much later, when a demonetization is announced, so that also becomes a top-down approach, because there has been no sort of a calculation as to whether this is viable, not viable. It's just on some thinking this kind of a policy has emerged. As against that, we can have something like a bottom-up policy. That is, a need is felt, and based on that need, certain alternatives have been discovered, and these alternatives have been assessed. And then finally, it has been put up to the policy makers. Take the Motor Vehicles Act, for example. When you find that a lot of accidents are taking place, then someone finds out that probably drunken driving or over speeding is the reason. And then you come up with a policy that, yes, drunken driving or over speeding should be punished. And then for that policy, you make a law. And then that's how, is an approach that you are coming up with a bottom-up approach, where certain alternatives are being discussed, debated, various data is being collected, and based on that data, a certain decision is being taken by those who are competent to announce that kind of a policy. Now, once you have determined these kind of objectives, another important point comes up, that these objectives may not be universally acceptable. Like, some of us may not like free electricity to be given, because we may feel that it's a drain on our exchequer, or some of us may not agree with the reservation policies. So it's not a question that an objective which a particular policy is laid down and towards which the governance is working to achieving that may be universally acceptable, because universal acceptance is not the issue, as long as the government which has come out with that policy or with that objective has the necessary competence to do that. So that's what governance is all about. And when I want to introduce a word of good governance, where does the difference comes up? So I think first thing will come up, has the governance met with the expectations what he raised in the mind of subject of its citizens? Number one. Number two, has it been accountable to what it did or what it did not do? And number three, was everything done in a very transparent manner? So if things have been delivered, if the objective have been achieved, and if the objective has been achieved in a transparent manner with accountability, we may call, yes, it is good governance. So the ultimate issue is about delivery. Now, what is this delivery all about? Delivery could be of goods, it could be of services, or it could be of even an environment where rule of law prevails. And a rule of law would mean that, where law supremacy is accepted by everyone, where there is no arbitrariness in decision making, and where everyone is accountable to law in a similar manner or in an equal manner. Many other definitions are there for the rule of law. So that kind of environment also becomes a deliverable with the governance as such. You talk of a product, you talk of a services. Take Manrega, for example, the services that you are delivering employment to the citizens. Take NRHM, for example, you are delivering the health service to the citizen. So to take, the pollution control board, no, they are trying to deliver a good environment, where there is no pollution to the citizen. So all put together, when we talk of delivery, we are talking of delivering either a product or a service or a kind of an environment in which the citizens will exist. Because all said and done, government is all about making the life of citizens a bit better than what it was earlier. Coming from this definition to how will we define good governance there? So it becomes good governance if the delivery is good. And what do I mean by good delivery? If the delivery is in right quantity, has it been of the right quality? Has it been made to the right person? Or has it been made in the right time? कहाँ वर्षा जब कृषि सुखान है, जब टाइम ही निकल गया, then what will the delivery do? Take Manrega. Now, Manrega is supposed to give employment to certain beneficiaries who qualify under the given definition of beneficiary. And you go through the reports of CAG and various other reports, you find that many persons who are not qualified as beneficiaries have been given benefits under Manrega. And then I call it was not good governance. Somewhere something was not good. That is one point. Take Manrega again on the quantity. Because when certain works are done in Manrega, then based on the measurement of those works, payments are made. Maybe at times payments have been made, but the works did not exist. So even the quantity was not there. NRHM, there have been n number of cases. We did a number of audits of NRHM. I was the president of Institute of Public Auditors of India, and we were given this assignment by the Ministry of Health. And we found in many places, in many states, expired medicines were administered to the patients. Now there, as regard the quantity was perfect because, the patient will not be happy with if the less quantity was given to him. But then the patient didn't bother whether it was expired medicine or not. So the quality suffered. Again, an example of bad governance. Take a very recent example where this unfortunate girl in LSR had to commit suicide because the scholarship was not given to her in time. That is, again, the delivery was not made in time. So to convert the issue of governance, issue of delivery, issue of meeting an objective into good governance, the issue comes up that are we taking care that it is going in the right quality, right quantity, in time to the right beneficiary? And if it is not doing that, then obviously someone somewhere is accountable. That's where comes the first point of accountability. And I think supervision, which is very important, but somehow not very, not taken in a very right direction in our country, because most of our supervisors are happy looking up. They don't look down into, what they are supposed to deliver. They look for, many other things, what they thought should be coming to that. So when you're talking of governance, when you're talking of good governance, when you're talking of delivery, you have to have certain control mechanisms. And one of the control mechanisms comes up that is there an effective supervision where you are able to deliver what you are supposed to deliver. Manrega, NRHM, police, which is supposed to deliver law and order, which is supposed to deliver, crime-free environment. Now, all these issues we can dissect all these issues and then come up with kind of answers that where does the governance has failed us as such. Now, when this LSR girl committed suicide, and as the paper reports told, that this particular case of giving her the scholarship was pending for over 1 year. The issue comes up, why was it pending for 1 year? Long back, we had done an audit on issue of these kind of scholarships to students. And we found in most cases, the department did not even bother to have complete addresses of all the scholarship holders. So the point is that even right at the planning stage itself, certain controls were missing, certain areas which were vulnerable were not taken into account, and because of that, the end objective could not be achieved. To achieve good governance, you have to have good management. And just taking a few minutes on this good management, long back in 1937 or so, there was this author who came with an acronym, POSTCORB, a very common acronym, POSDCORB. P stands for planning, O stands for organization, S stands for staffing, D is for directing, which also includes decentralization and delegation. Then CO stands for coordination, R stands for review, and B stands for budgeting. So ultimately, all these words put together gives you a management style, because whatever you have to manage, you have to have a focus. You have to think of the end objective. From the end objective, you have to plan to achieve that end objective. Then you have to see that whether you have the necessary organization there with you or not. You have to see your staffing. You have to find budgeting. You have to correlate your budget with your plan so that your plan can be put into action. Then you have to keep monitoring the action, and then you have to keep reviewing it till the final objectives are met. So this POSTCORB is what, if you really go into that, all the details, and if all these elements of management are taken care of, then you will find certainly the quality of governance can be a bit better as such. And once, like we go into this issue of entire concept of planning and all that, a very important issue comes up. Have we able to identify the vulnerabilities which must be checked to ensure that ultimate objective is met? Case of delay in giving a scholarship, someone did not look into whether the addresses were available, whether all the necessary certificates had been taken, whether all these certificates were necessary or not. And that's what we call a risk analysis. That is, have we identified whatever risks are there in the process of achieving that objective? And have we been able to identify controls which are necessary to mitigate these risks? And no risk can be mitigated 10%. So have we also identified that what will be the residual risk? Now, once all these things we have done, maybe that there would be some issue that governance would be a bit better. Give you an example from one of the most famous novel, that Alice in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. When Alice is going in a jungle and she comes into a place where there are two roads, a fork is there. And she meets the cat there, the Cheshire cat. And then she asks the cat, where does this road go? So the cat asks Alice, where do you want to go? She says, it doesn't matter, like, I don't know where I want to go. So then the cat tells her, in that case, take any road. Now that's the issue in governance. Is there a focus? Now, if the focus is not there, if your end objective is not clear, if there is some blurredness in your end objective, now surely you will not be able to identify the path ahead. Now, continuing with the same example, once you know which road you have to take, then you have to find out that on that road, what kind of obstacles are there? Is there a river there? Are there certain mountains, or is there a desert? And depending on what lies ahead, you have to train your staff. If your staff is not trained, which is another control which must be existing in all the departments, because if the staff is not trained properly in achieving what they are supposed to do, surely the governance is not going to take place. So you find out the problems which will exist in the way what you are supposed to traverse, and then find out what would be the training requirement for the staff, and then go ahead with that. Then probably the governance could be much better. So you're talking of risk, you're talking of controlling the risk. And when you talk of controlling the risk, three kind of controls come up. You have a preventive control, you have a detective control, and you have a corrective control. Just give you one more example, because before I come down to the issue of accountability, what happened in Punjab National Bank? Someone kept issuing a letter of undertaking, which were obviously fake. Now, if X is issuing the letter of undertaking, then a receipt will come, and if the receipt is also coming to X, no control is there. But suppose you work out that X issues the letter of undertaking and the receipt is coming to Y, then Y can find out, look, this LOC was never authorized. So, and in fact, the Punjab National Bank risk manual provides for this kind of a control. Now, had this control been there, surely this kind of a fraud could have been detected in time. Second, there's a control of job rotation, that you rotate a person, when you rotate a person, then the new person who comes, he will be able to find out if something was going wrong. So the point comes up, even the job rotation was not there, because I believe, as per the paper reports, that someone told the Punjab National Bank, ye aadmi acha kaam kar raha hai, let him continue there and all that. So the point
अगर
is,
वो करनी है अपनी वीडियो ऑन करनी है तो यहाँ से हो जाएगी
यार ऑफ
Sorry?
नहीं
So the point comes up that if you are not able to put through adequate controls, and then because of that, the delivery does not take place, who becomes accountable for that? Now, controls become necessary. The idea of planning becomes necessary. Then giving training to your staff becomes necessary. And you talking of first step in accountability comes down the clarity of focus. Are you clear what is going to be your end result? And if your focus keeps changing, I recall in the 90s, there was a focus that health for all by 2000. Then it changed to health for all by 2010. Then it changed to health for all by 2020. Now I think it is 2030 or whatever. So the point is, if you keep changing your milestone, surely something somewhere will be a miss as such. Apart from having a proper focus, issue comes up whether your objectives are overlapping. Many places the objectives overlap. Take the issue of panchayat in our country. 14th Finance Commission gave a large amount to panchayat, some 2,76,000 crores. And panchayat get money, direct money from this. They get money from Manrega, they get money from MP-led program, they may get money from PM Sadak Yojana and all that. Now, I have seen cases where a road was made funded from Manrega, and the same road was shown in MP-led program, and the same road was shown in PM program. The point is, because in all these three, accounting is done by different methods, by different organizations. And because three different organizations are doing accounting for these three expenditure, you find that such a particular thing, such a kind of a fraud takes place like that. So when you do not have this kind of a convergence in your objectives, when you have multiplicity of schemes which are kind of focusing on the same kind of objective, then surely these issues come up like that. Many examples, on that which comes up like that. Now, with this, let's come down to the issue of accountability, that where does the entire process of governance, apart from supervision aspect, apart from governmental control aspect, what are the issues available? Media could be one, and you know that how media functions, because media is a very potent instrument in promoting or enforcing accountability. But there must be freedom of expression to the media, and then media must be reasonable enough not to go beyond that kind of a freedom. We have many cases in the past, I'm sure I need not discuss that. Both ways there is something lacking. Sometimes the media goes overboard, sometimes the media's freedom of expression gets limited, but otherwise media still serves a good purpose for ensuring that the accountability takes place. I'm not going to talk more about the media aspect, but let's come on to the other issues. We came with a law RTI in 2005. the Right to Information Act. And under this, we have the CIC functioning. That is, each citizen of the country has a right to call for any information subject to certain conditions. And if that information is not given to him or her, then they can approach the Information Commissioner. And then there is some also provision that the official who had denied the information can be penalized. But look at the case in Delhi. In Delhi CIC, as of now, day before yesterday, I was reading in the paper when a new information commissioner was given the oath. 30,000 cases are pending as of today in the CIC's office in Delhi. Now, 30,000 cases means that they will take over 2 years in getting disposed of. So if I want information today, and if information is not given to me today and I go to CIC and I wait for 2 years, then the purpose of coming up with the RTI Act or the CIC and all that somewhere gets defeated. A minus point in that, yet RTI has served a great deal of purpose. In fact, RTI has made the bureaucrats sit up, and they do take care that when they come up with a decision, there is enough transparency so that the citizens can be satisfied on what basis that decision was taken. Then you have this next institution of the CVC, the Central Vigilance Commissioner, which came under the Act, Central Vigilance Act. And then they have their own way of functioning. Then you have the CBI. Now, CVC, CBI, they are both there to enforce accountability. As against enforcing accountability, you have this institution of CAG, the Comptroller and Auditor General of India, of which I have been a part for many years, where the issue is not of enforcing accountability because CAG does not have any power with him to enforce accountability. There is the question of promoting accountability. That is, like you talk of audit, I'm always reminded of Kabir, this couplet from Kabir, Nindak nere rakhiye, Angan kuti samaye, bin pani sabun bina, nirmal kare swabhav. So audit becomes, that kind of a nindak, that kind of a critic who you keep with you, and then he is not asking you to give any contribution, and is trying to see that whatever mistakes or whatever irregularities are there, they are kind of minimized as such. Because audit is there only to promote accountability. As I say, it's not there to enforce accountability because the audit opinions are not binding. Unlike a judgment by the court, which becomes binding, an audit opinion is not binding. It is only an advisory in nature. Now, it cannot be binding also because the CAG does not have any power. As you know, the CAG of India comes under Constitution of India, Part 5 of the Constitution of the India, Chapter 5, which says Article 148 to 151. Now, Article 149, which determines what should be the duties of CAG, it says that the CAG of India shall have a duty to audit all matters in relation to the Consolidated Fund of India. Now, two words become very important here. Number one, Constitution of India says that the CAG has a duty. It does not give any power to the CNAG. Now, when you have a power, you have certain discretion whether to use that power or do not use that power. But if someone has given you a duty, then you have no discretion. You have to carry out that duty, whether the other person likes it or not. So that is first thing which comes up. Second thing comes up, it says in relation to matters relating to the consolidated fund. The moment it uses the word in relation, it makes the duty of the CAG go, the scope of the duties go much beyond the accounts. Because in relation means right from the determining the policy, to implementation of policy, to determining the beneficiary, to determining the entire course of action as such, because then, as I say, CAG is there only to promote accountability, not enforce accountability. That way, the Constitution provides that the CAG, the scope, also is to be determined by the CAG itself, not by anyone else. Sometime back in the government of Odisha had objected that why should the CAG be carrying out performance audit? That there's not much of a time, so I will not go into more detail, but we do three kind of audits. What we call the financial audit where the accounts are certified, saying that the accounts reflect a true and fair picture, or we do a compliance audit where we look into whether all the rules and regulations have been observed or not, and we do a performance audit that whether the expenditure incurred by the government had really resulted in whatever objective were to be resulted. So government of Odisha came up and said, look, the CAG, the constitution does not give any power to the CAG to do performance audit. And Ministry of Finance clarified this about 10, 12 years back. Ministry of Finance clarified that yes, CAG can do performance audit and it is very much within the scope of audit, and the CAG shall determine its own scope as such. When we go to other countries, like I worked with Nepal for some time, I find that the Nepal Audit Act gives a lot of power to the Auditor General there. The Sri Lanka Audit Act gives a lot of power to the Auditor General there. In many cases, the Auditor Generals have got a lot of power, but somehow in India, the Auditor General does not have much power except the power for calling the records. And even the power for calling the records is not a very unfettered power, because if someone does not give a record, then the issue is that the CAG does not even have that kind of power which is available to a citizen under RTI, that the person can be penalized. In fact, in 2010, when Vinod Rai was the CNAG, a particular amendment to the CAG's DPC Act was proposed, in which we had requested that at least that much of power can be given to the CAG, that if some government official is not providing the particular record to the auditor, then he can be penalized. The Ministry of Finance till today has not considered that, and I don't know whether they will ever consider that. So Article 148, under which the CAG is appointed, it talks about that the CAG, the CAG of India shall be appointed by the President under his hand and seal. Now, the point which comes here is, if you go to Article 75 of the Constitution, which says that there shall be a Council of Ministers, which will be collectively responsible to the Parliament, and that which will provide advice to the President, because President functions on the advice of Council of Ministers. So the point comes up, in the appointment of CAG, the Constitution says that the appointment will be under hand and seal of the President, and the way I interpret it, that the President does not require any advice from the Council of Ministers as to who should be appointed as the CAG. Long issue that how the CAG should be appointed, because audit, if it is not independent, somehow audit does not really serve the purpose what it should be serving. So independence start from the appointment itself, and if the appointment of the CAG is not independent, somehow the things do not work out the way it should be. Coming down to other aspects of audit, I said, we do financial audit, we do compliance audit, and we do the performance audit. Now, primarily, the things which are looked into audit and which relate to the issue of governance, which relate to the issue of post-corp, as I said right in the beginning, or the issue of the delivery, the first point comes up that whether the money which was spent was legally available or not. Now, legally available comes up whether money had been budgeted by the Parliament or not. If the money was not budgeted, audit will come up with an objection saying, look, this money was not legally available. Now, budgeted means it comes again with reference to that objective, because when Parliament is passing a budget, Parliament is saying, okay, this money will be used for this particular objective. And if the money has not been used for that objective, then it is for the audit to look into that how can you get that objective achieved if you're not utilizing that money for that purpose. So whether money was legally available, whether that money was utilized for the purpose for which it was given. And the issue of classification of accounts comes up there. And then comes the issue of financial propriety, whether the expenditure was incurred keeping in mind the canons of financial propriety, which are, as I'm sure most of you know about, that government expenditure should be incurred in a manner in which a man of ordinary prudence will incur expenditure from his own pocket. Now, this man of ordinary prudence is actually the legal fiction, because someone may be very happy to buy a shirt for 2,000 rupees, and another person may be happy to buy a shirt for 200 rupees. So what exactly is the expenditure which should be incurred? It's basically saying that, you should exercise due diligence when you are incurring that expenditure. So that's the first canon. And the second canon says that the expenditure should not be prima facie more than what the expenditure demands. So these are the four basic things which comes, when you talk of auditing a particular department with reference to good governance, that whether monies were legally available, whether they were spent for the purpose for which they were meant for, and whether the canons of financial proprieties were observed, and whether the expenditure was incurred with due sanction from the competent authority. Now, once all these things are there, then you find that no audit observation will come, as such. Comes another issue, which really disturbs the entire process of governance, and that's the issue of corruption. Audit, as it is, does not have much of a role to point out corruption. It can point out wherever a financial irregularity is there. And I make the difference between financial irregularity and corruption because if someone has made money by a particular financial irregularity, then it is corruption. But if the financial irregularity is just because of negligence, then yes, it is an irregularity for which some action should be taken, but then it is not a corrupt practice as such. So that distinction comes up. And for going into corruption, one has to go beyond the paper. And audit gets limited to paper. So that's where audit can pass on those issues to the CVC or to the CBI, and they can go further for investigation, whatever investigation they want to do, pick up whatever kind of evidence are available with them, and based on that, whatever comes up. So when you're talking of corruption, many issues come up, and that's where the issue of vigilance comes up, that whether you have put through the kind of controls which will ensure that such irregularities do not take place. I said right in the beginning that we're talking of preventive control, we are talking of detective controls, and we are talking of corrective controls. Preventive controls turn out to be more important because once you have put preventive controls in action, then you can ensure that the irregularities will not take place. Detective control will come later because by that time an irregularity would have taken place, and then it will be only what we call the maar piche pukar. Now that is one thing which comes out when we talk of promoting accountability through audit, that audit comes only after all the action has taken place. So it only becomes a kind of learning for future, or maybe, if some sort of a redeemable action can take place, then that action can be taken place by the concerned executive. But then by that time, the damage has already been done. I said audit only gives an opinion. It does not give judgment which can be binding. And when you look into an opinion, you can make a difference. Do you look at an opinion as a feedback, or do you look into an opinion as a criticism? If you look into an opinion as a criticism, then it does not serve the purpose, because then there is a difference coming up between audit and auditee. But if you take that opinion as a feedback, then surely it comes up that yes, that feedback can be taken with an open mind. And if in that feedback you find that some issues can be taken care of, which can be improved, then the department can take that kind of an improvement there, and maybe then it comes up with a little better governance. The issue of good governance and accountability is all interlinked with each other. You increase the accountability, the good governance automatically increases. You decrease the accountability, you find that the governance becomes a bit bad, because then if the accountability is not there, then surely things will not fall into place. And to keep the governance accountable, it is for all the citizens to be aware, to know what is due to them and what they ultimately should have been getting, and what is it which is not coming to them. A very small thing, where I would like to finish it, that some years back, actually, Mr. Subhash Pandey only had done that study. We had done a study that whatever pronouncements were made by government in budget, how many of those were implemented? And this report is available on the IPI website. It made a very interesting study that many announcements were made in the budget speeches, but they were not even initiated, in the next few years. So many times, the government will come up and just make announcements like that, and then they really will not even initiate those. And then someone must come and ask questions to them, which basically should come in the parliament. But again, talking about the parliament, the separation of power will become a separate subject altogether. So I thought, I will stop here because I was told that something about 40 minutes I can take and then leave some time for questions. So I think through questions, I'll be very happy to answer whatever queries come up. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Yeah.
sir. Thank you very much for your wonderful lecture. I have requested Dr. Ajay Sonavane to take up questions, but before he does that, even I have a couple of questions, sir.
Please.
I was just listening to you, and you said that like the manifesto of political parties, there are so many things, and then you gave the example of the CM of Delhi, that if he says that well, he will be providing the free electricity and free water if he wins, so that also becomes a part of the policy. And then just now you have given example of the budget that certain schemes have been discussed in the budget, and those schemes have not been initiated, once the budget has been passed. Now, in these two cases, the things become the policy matter. And how do you look at that? Again, it is something, the policy which was not meant to be implemented, or the policy where there is, I mean, what exactly is that? What exactly these kind of policies are?
Look, when you see, basically policy is that what are the intentions of top management? The top management decides, okay, we want to do that. As I said, if it's a top-down approach, then they really have not gone into any discussion whether it's feasible or not. So you just go and say, okay, I'll give free electricity, good enough. And then you thought that it will be a popular thing and through which you will be able to get votes, good enough. Or you go to Bihar and you say, fine, then I'll give free vaccine. Or you come with, whatever kind of announcement you think will be able to get votes for you, good enough. Then when you are talking of the second thing, what I talked was about the budget pronouncements. That when you are coming up with your budget speech, you don't have that kind of a popular notion that yes, you must come with promises which you are not willing to fulfill. But if in budget certain things come up, where government comes up and says, okay, we will do this, and they don't even initiate that, then I think someone must be held accountable for that. Now that accountability will come through the election, because it is only in the election that the public can decide whether they would like to re-elect that government or not. I'm not going to that kind of a politics, whether our electorate will vote for development or whatever. So I'm not going to that. But then that is where the accountability comes up through the election process. Another accountability can come there through the scheme of parliament. We talk of parliament, we talk of separation of power in our country. Though the constitution does not really lay down separation as such, but you know that part 5 of the constitution, chapter 2 talks about the executive, chapter 3 talks about the legislature, and 4 talks about the judiciary. So that way, though it does not talk about separation, but it has separation inbuilt. So the point is, when you have an executive, the council of minister, and when you have the same minister as legislature, these two have different kind of scheme of work. Go back to Mundra scandal, 1956, where Firoz Gandhi issued that particular thing. And Firoz Gandhi was a member of Congress party. And he was the one who said, yes, the corruption has gone on in LIC. So he cut across the party line. He did not, he was on to that separation kind of an issue. And he says, yes, there was a corruption, he raised that issue. And another good point there was, if you Google Mundra scandal, you will find out, inquiry was given to the then Justice of Bombay High Court, Mr. Justice Chagla. He said he will do an open inquiry and he will finish the inquiry in 21 days. So he held an open inquiry where members of public were allowed to enter. In 21 days, the inquiry was over, the result was given. The point is, when you talk of polity, when you talk of accountability, the issue of willingness of the government of the day comes up. are they willing to be held accountable or not? When 2G came up, in 2G, the issue was an issue of corruption. Now, on the issue of corruption, when you find in the Public Accounts Committee, the division came based on party politics. That those who belong to one party, they said there was no corruption. Those who belong to another party, they said there was corruption. So rather than discussing the fact whether there was corruption or not, they went on a party issue. Now, once you kind of defocus this kind of a separation, then accountability is not possible in the parliament. So then media must come up. Then something else must come up. That's how I look at these things.
Fine, sir. And one more thing, sir. You were just giving example of RTI so far as transparency is concerned. Now, it is stated that if you do not like a legislation, if you do not like a law, you better overburden it like anything. So it will die its own death. Now, what exactly is happening in the RTI, as you have rightly pointed out, that there are
30,000.
30,000 cases pending in Delhi, 2 years or maybe more than 2 years for CIC to dispose of those RTI appeals. The question is that, I was heading the law center too for 3 years. And I think it was never the intention of the legislature that RTI should be as the main work, in the administration. Morning, you come to know that, well, a couple of RTIs, have been filed. Now, the time which is given to you, because the RTI is filed with the CPIO in the university, and from there it is sent to the concerned departments, and the concerned department hardly gets, 4 or 5 days or 6 days. So you have to finish it at, priority basis. Now, what is happening is that in the RTI, there are like 40 questions which have been asked. Every question has got sub questions. Fine. And then the things which are being asked, this Mahatma Gandhi statue, it was made in the faculty premises. When was it made? Who made it? What was the cost incurred? Now, if suppose that was made sometimes in 1970s or so, now maybe that you may say that records are not available also, but you will have to do some kind of an exercise. And the example which I am giving you, these are the real examples, where 40 questions are being framed in one RTI with many questions. Questions. Now, what is working on RTI as a full time? The RTI has taken the full time, and your main administration has now taken as part time. So what is happening is that lot of RTIs are coming, and many of them, they are not satisfied. So ultimately, a backlog is being created. Now, nobody knows that maybe in the future, the RTI, the CIC may face the same problem as our judiciary is facing today, where
Actually, it's a very
cases are pending. Yeah.
Yeah.
Unless you have some kind of mechanism in these acts to prevent the misuses. Giving unfettered power to citizens for just 10 rupees, go and file anything, whatever you want to. Then obviously, get ready for these.
Yes. Yeah.
And ultimately.
Yeah, you are right. I think these are very difficult questions where answers are difficult to find, because the issue of locus standi comes up in RTI. Someone is asking a question. Why are you asking that question? No one is bothered about. This has been debated a number of times, but ultimately it has come to, let it be like this. See, the point is RTI or CIC, all these are kind of controls. And you rightly say that, this overburden the department so much that ultimately the main function suffers. That PIL also, the Supreme Court has gone ahead and said, in fact, to Prashant Bhushan, they said that you have started a factory of PIL and all that. Now, the point, I'm slightly diverting it, I'm diverting it again from the control angle. You put controls because you want that things should move in the right direction. Now, today what has happened, we are putting excessive controls. And once you put excessive controls, then somehow the governance again suffers. So what happens? Uh, Take, like the corporate governance issues. You came up with company law, then you came up with, SEBI, and you come with LODR. So the point is, everywhere you are coming up with so many laws, so many reports, so many controls, that the ultimate issue of delivery by the department suffers. And I know of certain departments, where they maintain files to give answers to RTI, because they know that any kind of RTI query can come up. So RTI, if we put in some sort of a locus standi, maybe the number of questions will come down. But if you put certain sort of a locus standi, maybe it will lose its kind of a importance what it has today. These are difficult questions. I suppose we have to live with it, and we have to find the best way out within these, because law is not going to change. So within this law, we have to work. Only thing comes up that those who function in the executive should really know exactly where they must answer an RTI, where they should not answer an RTI. Many times in the RTI, questions come where they are questioning why a decision was taken. Now, RTI Act is very clear that why a decision was taken is not to be asked. RTI, you will only say whatever is available on a piece of paper on your file, nothing more than that. But then the minus point comes up that in many cases, I know that person will say, fine, I am not giving you that particular thing, because ultimately what will happen? He will be fined some 2,500 rupees or something like that. So he's willing to give that 2,500 rupees. That is one minus point. Second minus point, that RTI is taken as a kind of a instrument to harass. I've heard person saying कि अच्छा तुम ये नहीं करोगे मैं तुम्हारे अगेंस्ट में एक RTI डाल दूंगा. Now, RTI has been also, is being misused. So again, maybe somewhere, sometime it should come up that if someone is misusing the RTI, I have many examples, but there is no time for that. If someone is misusing the RTI, then yes, some action should be taken against that. Yeah, please.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Dr. Ajay, can you please take up the questions?
Yes, sir. Good evening, sir. So there is one question, sir, that is, can delegation of authority helps in good governance and accountability?
Yeah.
From Rupal Rathod.
Sorry, I didn't get it.
Can the delegation of authority helps in good governance and accountability?
Yes, delegation is a must, because if you don't delegate, the person at the top will be overburdened. So delegation is something which is inbuilt in the process of administration. But then along with the delegation, as I gave that postcode, there must be a mechanism of review. There must be a mechanism of taking feedback, that whether whatever was delegated has resulted into what that person was supposed to do. You talk of financial delegation, Government of India has what you call the delegation of financial power rules. Financial powers are delegated. In fact, all the powers which the government officers have with them are delegated powers. And everywhere the law and the rule made under the law provide that which particular officer at what level will have what kind of a powers. And if someone use the power given to that person, then it becomes questionable that, okay, why did he exceed the powers given to them? Yes, certainly the delegation is a very effective tool if properly exercised, with controls put in that the person to whom power has been delegated has done what he was supposed to do. But the moment delegation goes into abdication, then it becomes bad. Yeah, please.
Yes, sir. There is one more question that can a CAG, that is a Controller and Auditor General, powers is amended as comptroller function is to be taken by Parliament currently? What are its implications?
See, Comptroller and Auditor General, the Comptroller function is about, initially it used to be some sort of a pre-audit, which does not exist as on today. Now, CNAG under Article 149, what I was talking about, and the CAG DPC Act is maintaining accounts for the state governments, though for the central government, accounts are being maintained by the central government itself. And apart from that, CAG is conducting all the audits as such. When it comes down to maintenance of accounts, the CAG DPC Act makes it, CAG DPC Act was passed in 1971 under Article 149 of the Constitution, and the CAG-DPC Act says that CAG shall continue keeping accounts for a state until the governor of the state makes a request to the CAG to take over the accounts. So under the Act, anytime if a state government wants to take over the function, they can take over the function of accounting. But auditing as such is something which is with the CAG only, because audit as per the Constitution also comes under the union list, whereas accounts come under the state list. So audit can never be taken over by the state government. It is a constitutional function with the CAG of India under Article 149. But accounts can go to the state government, as in the center it has already been bifurcated with the Civil Account Service and the CGA, Controller General of Accounts. So there's nothing like a controller function being taken over by the Government of India. Already Government of India has taken over the accounting function way back in 1976, and they continue doing the accounting function, and the CAG is only doing the auditing as regards the central government is concerned.
Okay,
Yeah.
sir. Yeah, there is one more last question, sir. That is, it's about digitalization. So can digitalization be used to create an automated system and assist in governance and accountability with respect to the RTI?
Digitization is really important. In fact, if you like, once the accounts are digitized, which they are available today, I won't call them 100% digitized as such, because we are not able to publish the accounts immediately, at the end of the financial year. But today, if you have digitized your accounts, availability of information based on accounts is easily available. And the entire governance, the planning aspect, the decision-making aspects, they will come from what information is available to you. And if the information available to you is accurate and is timely and is complete, then you find the decision what you are taking would be much better. And digitization will certainly help in giving you the information. It can give you the information in terms of, geographical area, that which state requires what kind of a thing. It can give it to you, in terms of various aspects of population. So once digitization is there, it does help in decision making, and it can, once the decision making is good, then your focus becomes better, and then certainly the governance will be much better. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. That was the questions.
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot for the wonderful lecture and the question answer session. And it was really, something very interesting. We keep on reading, Constitution, but we never studied from this particular perspective which you have put up before us. And thanks a lot for speaking on governance and accountability. Now, I'll request the OST, Dr. Ashutosh Mishra, to propose a vote of thanks.
Okay.
Good evening, sir. On behalf of DSPG Institute of Eminence, it is my proud privilege to propose a vote of thanks. DSPPG is highly grateful to Shri Anupam Kulse sir to accept for accepting our invitation and enlighten us on accountability and governance. Sir has enlightened us on the issue control, planning, training, accountability, in media, CIC functioning, RTI, CVC, CBI, and he has discussed the constitutionality of CAG as well. He stated to achieve good governance, we should have good management. He has discussed the issues of NRHM, World Bank, MV Act. Then he has discussed top-down and down-top approach. He has discussed the good governance, product delivery, and risk analysis. And he has given his valuable thought to all our participants. I want to give special thanks to Dr. Subhash Pandey sir, Member Advisory Committee, DSPPG, and Professor V.K. Ahuja, Joint Director, DSPPG. I want to give thanks to Dr. Sonowane and to all student working committee member and to all participants who have participated. this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mishra. Thanks a lot, Anupam sir, and I hope that this is just a beginning, and we'll keep on troubling you in future also. And I hope that you will be kind enough to come to our invitation and interact with our audience. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.